Hello. Today I wanted to talk about my favorite war books. I have a couple novels, I have some nonfiction on this list. It is just war. If you saw the history video that I posted a few weeks ago, where I talked about my top 10 favorite books for my undergraduate in history, I am a history buff, nerd, whatever you want to call it. So while those books were ones that I had to read, most of these books are books that I read completely by choice. And so I think that a war is a topic of history that I have always been very interested in. I think the whole reason that I have decided to dedicate my both personal and academic studies to history is because whenever I was younger, my older brother and I loved to watch war movies. And so I think that as a young girl, that really set me off on this trajectory where now I really enjoy war media. So today I just kind of wanted to talk about 5 books that I read that are probably my top 5 favorite war books, and then 4 more books that I plan to read soon that are in the war genre. So these are books that I can acclaim for, and books that have high acclaim that I want to see what all the hype is about. So I will go over my books first that I have already read, and then I'll tell you about books that I plan to read in the future, and maybe you can convince me to read them. We'll see. So the first book that I wanted to talk to you about is easily my favorite book on this list, and easily a top 3 books of all time for me, and that is All Quiet on the Western Front. This book encapsulates everything. This is, if you don't know, obviously I'm not reinventing the wheel here. It says that it's the greatest war novel of all time, and I agree. But if you don't know what this book is about, this is a World War One story from a 17-year-old German kid's perspective. And it just tackles trench warfare, and it's sickening, which is exactly what it needs to be. But I think that this book, why it is so powerful to so many people, is that it touches on every single aspect of what a war does, to both a personal and an individual level, to a whole generation. It is physically sickening, it's mentally sickening, and I think that it weaves in and out between those 4, kind of facets. It weaves in and out of them so seamlessly and so consistently that you never feel like you have a moment to sit back and collect yourself, so that it's terrible and sickening throughout the entire thing. Which I know that doesn't sound like it is a very good reading experience, but it very much is. What I also think that this book does really well is it's written from the voice of a 17-year-old kid. So the wording in here is pretty simple. The sentence structure is pretty simple. But I think that Remarque does a really good job of filling each of those sentences in they're full of power and emotion, even though it's so simply put. So I think that this is a book that, pretty much anybody could read if they're interested in reading it. It's not like, this is a difficult book, other than maybe the themes are a little bit difficult. So throughout the whole story, you're not kind of even allowed to detach yourself from the destruction and the inhumanity, so that you connect with the humanity so much more. I think that one of the most powerful scenes in this book is whenever our main character, Paul, finds himself in a trench with a Frenchman, and they try to kill one another. And Paul finds himself victorious in this battle as the Frenchman wastes away slowly. And Paul deals with this in such a way that is so psychologically raw because, at first, obviously, he's just doing what he's conditioned to do, which is just to fight the enemy. But, as this man wastes away slowly and agonizingly, Paul finds himself, snapping out of that narrative that he has set for himself. And he thinks, I'm going to find your family. I'm going to write to your family. I'm going to tell them that I'm so sorry for what I did. It's terrible what I did. And then as he exits, this trench, when he finally can get out of this pothole and away from this man who is agonizingly and very slowly dying, Paul forgets about it. He moves on. And I think that that's a really powerful statement as to, just how you have to turn your emotions off, and, at any given moment, you can just kind of go crazy and then snap right back out of it. It's a really, really sickening book. But again, this is one of the greatest war novels ever for very good reason. This tackles everything. This book is amazing. The next book that I wanted to talk about is Catch-22 by Joseph Heller. This book is known for being very funny and satirical and just absurd. And I think that Heller does a really good job of, again, with this weaving in and out business, Heller does a really good job of weaving in and out of things being sickening into things being funny. So you're consistently feeling like you're in this whirlwind, much like a soldier would. So this story generally follows our main character, Yossarian, as he's thrown into these absurd scenarios in which he cannot extricate himself, and he consistently feels like somebody is trying to kill him, or, just somebody's out to get him, or he just can't escape from the bureaucratic cogs of being an American soldier in World War II. And what's really compelling about this book is it's structurally incredibly cyclical. And with this cyclical nature, again, it's, you're hearing about this ridiculous story, maybe with how the food is attained for this squadron. And then a few sentences later, you're thrown into the war in a way that, really throws you off. And I think that, the cyclical nature here, there's often repetition of these stories that are really haunting Yossarian, particularly the death of a man who was on a fighter plane with him. And Yossarian repeats this story, or I guess the narrative repeats this same story multiple times throughout the book, pretty consistently, and with every single repetition, it gives you a little bit more hint as to what's really going on, until at the very end of the book, you get the full story, and it is so unbelievably sickening. And you can see why, this was such a big deal for Yossarian. Heller is able to bring attention to the violent nature of not just war, but of life in general. So, like all books on this list, this one tackles more than it originally states. But also, this book is very, very funny. I mean, there's only a few books that I've ever read that have actually made me laugh out loud, and this one did consistently throughout the whole book, which is incredible how you can both be so sickening and so funny at the same time. I think my favorite portion of it was whenever Yossarian was faking sickness to hide out in the med tent for a couple days. And he takes inspiration from a man who is also in there, who is definitely not faking, but Yossarian think that he is. And so this other man in the tent is seeing everything twice. And whenever this man announces, "I'm seeing everything twice," he is sent off back into the ward for more days. And so again, doesn't have to go back to war. So Yossarian takes inspiration from this and also exclaims, "I see everything twice." And so the doctor goes up to Yossarian and holds up two fingers, and holds up one finger and says, "How many fingers do you see?" And Yossarian says, "Two." And the doctor then holds up two fingers and says, "How many fingers do you see?" Yossarian says, "Two." "And how many now?" asked the doctor, holding up none. "Two," said Yossarian. By Jove, he's right," the doctor declared jubilantly. "He does see everything twice." And so they rolled Yossarian away on a stretcher into the room with the other soldier who saw everything twice, and quarantined everyone else in the ward for another 14 days. "I see everything twice," the soldier who saw everything twice shouted when they rolled Yossarian in. "I see everything twice," Yossarian shouted back at him just as loudly, with a secret wink. "Walls, walls," the other soldier cried. "Move back the walls." The walls, Yossarian cried. Move back the walls. So one of the doctors pretended to shove the wall back. Is that enough? The soldier, who saw everything twice, nodded weakly and sank back into bed. Yossarian nodded weakly too, eyeing his talented roommate with great humility and admiration. He knew that he was in the presence of a master. His talented roommate was obviously a person to be studied and emulated. During the night, his talented roommate died, and Yossarian decided that he had followed him far enough. I see everything once, he cried quickly. And so the doctors came back in, and the doctor held up 2 fingers and asked, how many fingers do you see? Yossarian said, 1. The doctor held up 2 fingers. How many now? 1. The doctor turned to the other doctors with amazement. He does see everything once. We made him all better. That whole scene is just so funny because, I don't know. I just really found myself laughing out loud at this book fairly consistently. And so this is just a super fun read and a super sickening read and a super powerful read. This book really can, again, do it all in a completely different way than All Quiet on the Western Front does. Slaughterhouse-Five by Kurt Vonnegut is also one of the greatest anti-war novels ever. Again, I never said I was reinventing the wheel here. Slaughterhouse-Five also tackles war in a different and inconsistent way. Pretty much there's 3 storylines in this book that are interweaving together consistently throughout the story. In one, our main character is in the war, World War II. In the second storyline, he is just a normal man back in society after the war. And in the third timeline, he has been abducted by aliens and he is being kept in a museum with a very hot supermodel whom he is expected to have children with. So anytime you tell anybody that that is the plot of this book, that's pretty silly. So again, this book is very funny in just the way that it is so unbelievably absurd. And it really just looks at PTSD and going insane after a war and just kind of like how these soldiers were expected to just go back to normal life. And often that was practically impossible because, I mean, they had seen things that they couldn't unsee. They had done things that they can't undo. So the thing about this book, though, is I loved the book. I enjoyed every single moment that I was reading it. You know, I ate this book up. I loved it. The thing about Kurt Vonnegut, though, is he's one of my favorite authors. Kurt Vonnegut always brings up topics that are important to be discussed. And he brings them up in a way that is accessible to everybody. Everybody enjoys a funny book. He brings them up in a way that anybody can understand, but I feel like Vonnegut never quite hits the mark on leaving a very large impact on me. So this story was, you know, supposedly one of the greatest anti-war novels ever, but whenever I closed the final page, I didn't feel any different than I did when I first picked it up. But maybe that's because I already just agreed with the themes of this book. But I loved this book. I enjoyed every minute of reading it. So very funny, so very absurd, and, you know, it's a really important read just in the literary landscape. I was debating putting this one on the list because this isn't outwardly a war novel. The Razor's Edge is a true story, just the author changed their names. But The Razor's Edge really centers around this one kid that signed up to go to war, you know, and he was too young, so he faked his age, and they sent him over anyway. So he was a young, you know, teen when he went over to war. And whenever he came back to America, he was just expected, again, to return to normal life. But he felt like he can't just return to normal life. So our story follows him and a load of other characters as he tries to search for his life in a way that he sees valuable, and he sees meaningful. He's creating his own path after seeing things that really disturbed him. So he becomes a bit of a monk for a bit, I think, like in India somewhere. He joins a coal mining, you know, kind of work group. Like, this kid goes across the planet just kind of trying to find himself, and all of the other characters in this book don't understand him. You know, they think you're engaged to this beautiful girl, you have this life that is handed to you. You can have this wonderful job that your best friend's very rich father is handing you. Your life is right here. What are you doing? And it's a really powerful story in finding your own journey. And so again, this isn't outwardly a war novel at all. I mean, you pretty much don't get any war in here whatsoever, but it deals with the aftermath psychologically of what war does to a person, especially to a very young kid that joined too early. But other than even the aftermath of war thing, The Razor's Edge is a really interesting book just in character-wise, because there are so many other characters in this book, and the way that they weave in and out of each other's lives, the characters just feel so real. Now again, because they are real, Mogum knew all, or Mom, I think you say his name. He just changed their names. These are real people that he knew. It's a really good look at just kind of humanity, even apart from this war theme that I am placing it into. This is just an interesting look at humanity and what makes different people do different things. And it's kind of set around like the Paris nightlife and what was going on in New York City post-war. So this is a very interesting book. I just wanted to put it in this category just because I believe that it fits. So if I can argue it, it's true. The last book in this top 5 favorite war books list is Philip Caputo's A Rumor of War. Now, this might look familiar if you watched my history video, because this was a book that I read for my American history class that was focused really on like the 1940s to the 1980s. So obviously we covered the Vietnam War in this class. And so whenever I had to read this book, I absolutely flew through it. I mean, this isn't a long book, but this also definitely isn't a short book. But again, this book was just so compelling that I absolutely flew through it. This is about one man. It's a nonfiction, like a memoir, and it is about this one man going into the Vietnam War, and he has this, he has this thought process, like every other kid that's ever gone to war, that he's going to be a hero, and it's going to be this valiant experience, and he's going to feel no pain. He's just going to go to Vietnam, it's going to be awesome, and then he's going to come home, and then there's going to be parades held for him because he's a hero and he's valiant. And then throughout his experiences, he discovers that war actually is very sickening, especially in Vietnam, where the lines between who is the enemy is blurred, the lines between even the landscape that's around you don't even understand. So it really kind of follows his downfall in his idealism. And, it goes from his entering the war into his court-martialing at the very end. And just anti-war sentiment breathes through this book. Super compelling, super easy in a nonfiction sense if you're trying to get into some nonfiction but you don't really know where to start. This is a very interesting one. So, thank you, Professor, for introducing me to this very good book. I'm very glad to have read it. Easily made the top 5. So for the next couple minutes, I just want to talk about a couple war books that I'm very interested in reading. Just because I haven't read that many books in my lifetime. I'm only 22, so there is plenty more time to read plenty more war books. The problem is, some of them take a lot of time. But I am very interested in reading War and Peace by Tolstoy. Russian literature is a area that I am very interested in. Obviously I like Dostoevsky. I love Mikhail Bulgakov. And so Tolstoy is an author that I haven't gotten to yet, and War and Peace is a very big book, but again, on themes that I'm very interested in. This is set around the Napoleonic Wars, which, as you can see from my list, I am more interested in modern wars like World War I and II. But Napoleonic Wars is an area that I haven't put much study into. So I'm very interested in getting to this at some point. I know that it is set kind of in two ways. One, at war, and it is very descriptive of the battle scenes in a way that I think a lot of people I've heard find boring, but I think that since I like war in the first place going into it, I think I will like that. And then also set around peace times with these very rich people throwing parties. So I plan on reading this at some point, but I need to wait until I have the time to dedicate myself to this. And I don't see anywhere in the near future where I have time to dedicate myself to this. I think that'll have to be somewhere in between I'm established in my career and I have kids. I'll read it then. But that's a book that I'm very interested in reading, and I do think it'll be a very good book once I finally get to it. Something that I'm also very interested in is World War I poetry is unbelievable. I feel like the poets during World War I really brought to the forefront things that hadn't really been said out loud before then. Before World War I, all of war media was valiant and powerful and didn't really discuss any of the horrors that were happening. And also, World War I was the first time that anything was that horrific before. So I'm very interested to get into this poetry from the World War I collection. This is also something that I feel like is kind of required reading for me because I'm going to be a high school history teacher. And so if I end up teaching American history, modern world history, I really enjoy teaching World War I through poetry because I think that that's a really powerful way to humanize it for students, instead of just telling them about gas masks and trench foot. This poetry can really connect the human aspects of war to them in a really powerful way. And so whenever I have taught World War I in the past, I've done so through one poem, Dulce et Decorum Est. That poem, unbelievable. But I can't always use Dulce et Decorum Est. So I think this poetry collection will not only be an interesting venture for myself, but I think it'll also improve my teaching a little bit if I end up teaching American history. The next book that I really want to read in the war area is Storm of Steel. This is a memoir from a German soldier about his experiences in World War I. A couple years ago, whenever I took a German history class, my professor told me that this book is very good. And then a couple months ago, like 3 years after my professor told me that, I found this sitting in the free bin outside of a thrift store. So now I have to read this. It is in terrible conditions. I can see why they just threw it in the free bin, but I don't care. It's free. But this memoir really looks at, obviously, the horrors of war and trench warfare, but it also just looks at the total, fascination with total, complete war. Because again, World War I was the first time that anything like this had ever happened before. And so, looking at this through a first-hand account is a really powerful way to understand it. So this book, will really follow Junger. I don't know. However you think you say that. I'm not German. But it will really follow him through, leading excursions, fighting. I think the British is who he was largely fighting at the front. And just kind of waiting for his imminent death that he believes will happen. I don't know whether it does or whether it doesn't, but I think I am very interested in reading this one. And I think that it'll also, work in tandem really well with All Quiet on the Western Front because, obviously, German, World War I think they'll work well together. The last book that I wanted to talk about today is I'm very interested in reading A Farewell to Arms. I also have The Sun Also Rises on my shelf, but I think I'm more interested in reading this first. Because I'm more interested in reading this one first just because I think that this one captures the themes that I think I'm more interested in. But this is largely set around a man who is an ambulance driver and a nurse that he is very much in love with. And it just kind of follows the relationship as it's set within this horrific, war-ridden, context. And so I think that, Ernest Hemingway is one of the great American authors, and I think that to fully understand war in its full context, I should probably throw in a little a little romance, a little love, to kind of contradict the agonies of war, or just perpetuate the agonies of war, maybe connect with the agonies of war even. So I'm very interested to get into some Ernest Hemingway. So these books are in no particular order, just those are books that I love, that tackle the themes of war in different ways, either structurally or looking at different wars or different contexts. And then in no particular order, those are just war books that I need to get to at some point. But at least in terms of War and Peace, I don't know when that's going to happen. But in the end, I love these war books because I think that, war is pushing the bounds of humanity to its very fullest. I mean, looking at wars from a historical sense is what is so powerful. Like, if you look at World War I, you can look at it from any lens, and every single aspect of human life is exaggerated. You can look at World War I through a feminist lens. What were the women doing? You can look at it from a technology lens. Wow, did we have a lot of new technologies then? You can look at it from a psychological perspective, a literature perspective. Everything that is cool about history and everything that's interesting about history, the humanity of history is emphasized within time periods of war. And I think that that's what I love so much about these books, is it doesn't glorify them. It doesn't, make war sound like something that we should want. These books really look at war in a way that, what is humanity? So in the end, those are just a couple books that I wanted to talk about. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next Sunday.